It's the Security Weekly News, and it's episode 284. I'm Doug White, and welcome to the week of 26 March 2023. We've got Twitter, tax scams, Microsoft and more Microsoft, executive orders, Pwn2Own, French bans on things, and more on this edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Well, my old friend Lou always said March comes in like a Wells digger's instep and goes out like a boiled owl or something. He used to get those things all confused, but, you know, that's whatever. All right. Well, I couldn't resist this first story, and the whole time I was reading it, I was thinking about William Gibson. And, I mean, you know, how long is it going to be before some of these big tech companies, and I'm looking at you, Elon, decide that they don't really have to do what anyone wants, that they're more powerful than the governments, that they, you know, supposedly control them, because they actually are getting to the point where some of these people have more money than governments and so forth. And I figure eventually one of them is going to wise up and go, why do we want to be here? We could move this whole operation to some country where my personal income is higher than the gross domestic product of this place. And, you know, and then they start hiring private armies and whatever. And, you know, they go looking for people they don't like. I mean, if Twitter passes a twit law that says any criticism of the emperor will result in a trial, and then they send out some twit marshals to drag you back to Muskburg or Elonville or whatever they want to call it for your trial. I think there's an episode of Black Mirror about that, I think, where everybody votes on everything. Or maybe, I think maybe that's actually an episode of the Orville, I think, where everybody has to vote. But anyway, you get punishment, hard labor at Twitter. You have to tweet for 20 years or something like that. But anyway, the reason I was thinking about all that was Twitter took down some leaked source code that had been sitting on GitHub for several months, and it was using a subpoena then to try to force GitHub to search for whomever leaked this and also whomever downloaded it or modified it in any way. And GitHub responded to this, which is called a DMCA. It's a DMCA infringement notice from Twitter on Friday, and they took down the code. Now, that's pretty common stuff, and they do that all the time, right? So if I take your code and I post it on GitHub, and you say, hey, I copyrighted this, he can't post that, then, you know, they take it down. The person who posted its handle is Free Speech Enthusiast. And this apparently had some overlap with some of the stuff Elon has said about, you know, free speech and how, you know, he's the last bastion of free speech and so forth. But then, you know, orders code taken down and whatnot. And Elon had said they want to make Twitter's code open source anyway. But now they're making people take it down. And I don't think there's some kind of elaborate plot here. But the implication is that maybe Free Speech Enthusiast is a disgruntled Twitter employee. Now, I do wonder if there's still any gruntled, or whatever the opposite of disgruntled is. Are there any gruntled Twitter employees still around? I mean, it sounds like they're pretty much all disgruntled at this point. But the New York Times said that the code had been public for some time and that Twitter is now using a subpoena to try and force GitHub to provide identifying information about who Free Speech Enthusiast is. And they also want the names and addresses of anyone else who's accessed or distributed the source code, and said they would then take further legal action once those were revealed. Now, Elon Musk, the CEO, had said back in February, him being all about the free speech and such, that he would open source the platform's algorithm, but that hasn't actually happened. Now, Twitter has said that they will open source the code for recommending tweets. So this is just a piece of subcode, and they're going to do that on the 31st of March. So we'll see if they actually do it or not. Well, April is tax month in the United States, and there are many, many, many tax scams. If you haven't received yours yet, you probably will. I think I got 12 calls today already, spam calls, all from 646 area codes, which is the less cool Manhattan area code. All of them trying to get me to call a number, because my taxes have been misreported. I'm going to be arrested, all the usual suspects. But please, and I would really encourage you to do this, advise your employees and your family members that the IRS does not communicate by tweets, emails, instant messages, cell phone calls, or any of that kind of stuff, and that any information that you receive asking for more information is very likely a scam. But this still tends to work on people. Now, this particular story that made me think of all this was about Emotet, and Emotet's been around a long time. And there is a new Emotet phishing scam that's being distributed to U.S. taxpayers, and it's impersonating. There's variations of it, but it's impersonating an email that has a W-9 form attached to it that is supposedly being sent to you by the IRS or by your employer. And a W-9, if you don't know what that is, in the United States, a W-9 reports what is called 1099 income, and this is what consultants and other people make. So if you did a job for, not all, this doesn't always get reported, but if my neighbor comes over and he re-roofs my house, in theory, when I pay him, I file a W-9. He gets a 1099. I don't know. I'm not an accountant. But anyway, the Emotet organizations have regularly targeted victims with themed phishing campaigns, particularly related to holidays, charitable donations, and business activities. And many scammers are particularly attracted to tax season because many, many, many people worry about the IRS and about being audited and all these kind of scary things. And, they're worried about their tax bills or tax refunds or what have you. Well, Malwarebytes reported part of this campaign, which was sending emails with IRS tax forms W-9 as a title, and they were claiming to be from an inspector, whatever that means, at the Internal Revenue Service. This file contained a zip archive, which was named W9form.zip, and it contained a malicious Word document. The document is over 500 megabytes in size. And, of course, that makes it harder for things like Malwarebytes to actually spot obfuscated malware contained in it. But since Microsoft blocks Word macros by default, it probably isn't going to work very well. But Unit 42 then reported a similar campaign is using OneNote documents embedded with Visual Basic scripts, which basically install Emotet. So that one has one of those, it's got like an email, it claims to be a business partner, then they're sending you a W-9 form, which scares people because they don't know what W-9 forms are, and oh no, did I have income I need to report, am I going to be audited? And it pops up, and it has a blurred out background, and it says, please click the view button to actually see the document. And of course, we all know that labeling a button view instead of run Emotet and take me over is a pretty easy thing to do. And when you click view, of course, it launches this Emotet-laden script. So you probably should send out an advisory about this and about tax season if you haven't already. And you probably should have that talk with your family again and remind them about, these are very common scams. They're coming for you. Beware, because they are. Microsoft is adding an Exchange security feature that will begin to throttle and eventually block all emails that are being sent from, quote, persistently vulnerable Exchange servers, end quote. They said that, and it was a little confusing to me how this is going to work exactly, but they said this would occur 90 days after admins are pinged to secure them. Obviously, I know what the term pinged means, but obviously they're not sending a ping. So they must be sending an email or some kind of notification to somebody. I don't know how they know who the admin is either, because these are on-prem systems. So I don't know exactly how they're getting their information, who they're sending the information to, or exactly what information they're sending. And I don't know if 90 days means when you're going to get shut off or if it means that's when throttling starts. There was not a lot of detail here. But the servers are described as on-premises or hybrid environments, which means, these sort of self-supported clouds that run end-of-life software and have not been patched by known security bugs. And we all know that sometimes you just run end-of-life software. It's like I think I have an Active Directory server that's like a 2003 server that's still sitting over there. It's not connected to the internet. so it's fine. But that's quite end of life, to like beyond the grave kind of stuff. But they went on to say it was, quote, any Exchange server that has reached end of life or remains unpatched for known vulnerabilities. And that included Exchange 2007, Exchange 2010, and we'll soon add Exchange 2013 to that list. So if you're running those things, you may want to actually look into this and see what are the real implications of this to me, and do I need to upgrade, patch, and or do something. But it said non-end-of-life servers would be also shunned if they're considered persistently vulnerable, and they did not define what that meant. A Shodan search in this article showed thousands of vulnerable Exchange servers that were currently vulnerable to proxy login, proxy shell, and other, all these other many vulnerabilities that Exchange has had. So you may need to upgrade if you're running one of those old ones, or at least plan to upgrade, but you also may need to plan some patching if you have not done so with your Exchange. And I know it's tough to patch Exchange, and I know it's tough to upgrade Exchange because I've tried to do it. But somebody's watching, so you might want to, start taking some action if you have not done that yet. Well, since it's Microsoft Day here, Microsoft also reported that it has evidence that a Russian APT group has been exploiting an Outlook 0 day since maybe as long ago as April of 2022. This resulted in their recommendation to enterprises to start actively looking for signs of compromise. And if you're not doing that, you probably need to be, because, these 0 days are not necessarily disclosed and they're not necessarily patched, so people may be exploiting them, and they're not going to give them up either. So this is a Russian APT, so they're going to keep that to themselves. The vulnerability was listed as already being exploited, and Microsoft did ship a fix for this month, but that would be still maybe almost a year that it's been out there. The Microsoft incident responders said that the attacks were from Russian-sponsored government-level hackers, which have been targeting organizations in Europe. So they may already be in the network if they're using it. The article contains links to new documentation for how to investigate these attacks and how to investigate your network that may have problems with this. They said the 0 day leaves very few forensic artifacts, and to find in a traditional forensic analysis was very difficult. So they urge defenders to target in the targeted sectors to use an in-depth and comprehensive threat hunting strategy, which is a good piece of advice anyway. But the vulnerability is triggered by a net-NTLM version 2 hash leak that then can be abused for initial access, meaning you can get in without credentials. It can exploit credentialed access, and it can allow a lateral movement to other accounts in persistent, and it can also persist in compromised mailboxes. They said the flaw may lead to exploitation even before the email is viewed in the preview pane, which is pretty scary, and it urged users to patch this. So it's a no-touch kind of exploit. They did not have a lot of details about exactly how all this worked in that specific article. I know that Joe Biden issued an executive order this week that was related to spyware. And I know that Jason is going to do that story, so I'm actually not going to talk about it, and I'm just going to scroll ahead over that. So it was a good story for him to talk about, and I actually thought about recommending it to him. Executive orders are a weird thing. For instance, Millard Fillmore signed 12 executive orders. Lincoln signed 48 executive orders. Grant signed 217 executive orders. Now, but Roosevelt signed 3,721, but Roosevelt, this is Franklin Delano, was the president for 12 years and was president during World War II, which, might have an effect on that. In the modern age, George W. Bush signed 291 executive orders, Obama signed 276, Trump signed 220, and Joe Biden has signed 108 executive orders so far. If you want a trivia question, who signed the least executive orders? And the answer is kind of obvious if you know anything about that. And my guess was William Henry Harrison. I looked it up, and yep, William Henry Harrison he was only president for 31 days. He refused, and I don't think that cold and rain causes disease, but he refused to wear a coat and hat to the inauguration and made the longest inaugural address in the history of the United States that clocked in at over 2 hours, which is a long inaugural address. But anyway, Joe Biden is passing an executive order, and these things are kind of weird because they don't go through Congress. They don't have a lot of ways to rescind them, and they get put in place. But modern presidents tend to use them to govern, which is a little bit of a trick. So, we'll see how that comes out, and I'm sure Jason is going to tell us a lot more about that when we get around to him. And I'm really stalling because, boy, did I write a lot of commentary about this particular thing. Da 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 da. Oh, say, can you see? Can you say Pegasus? I could do Robin Williams for a little bit and just kind of be crazy on camera, like on the Johnny Carson show. We're getting there. Did I write a lot of words about this or what? I think I wrote a graduate thesis about it. Oh my God. Why did you do this, Doug? Why, oh why did you write so much content about Pegasus and spyware and all this stuff? But, I don't like executive orders, so I could definitely talk about that for a bit. I'm not a fan of this because it circumvents the system and there's no way to rescind them. They don't expire. They were designed to be used in wartime. So they really put this rule in place so that presidents could quickly take action, like when, say, Pearl Harbor gets bombed or something like that. But in the modern age, these things tend to get more and more used for governing rules, and I really think that gets to be a problem. So anyway, okay, I'm there now. Well, congrats to Synactive, who won $100,000 in the Pwn2Own competition in Vancouver this year. They cracked a Tesla Model 3. And they subverted the Elon Musk brand entertainment center on the car, and they managed to actually get into the core management of the Tesla. They totally won over $500,000 for this particular exploit. In the overall competition, Ubuntu really took a beating. They were found to have critical flaws by 3 different teams. Looking at Ubuntu, Win 11 was shown to have serious flaws, and VMware Workstation was also cracked. All of that kind of tells me that guidance from Microsoft about you need to be actively threat hunting in your own network is probably means it's pretty good advice, because obviously these big companies are not taking action to secure their stuff the way they maybe should, and they're going to let you find it. Over $1 million total was handed out to competitors in Pwn2Own. A total of 27 unique 0 days were found, and $1,035,000 along with a car was given away in prize money. Synactive was the overall winner of the competition, taking $530,000 and a Tesla Model 3 back to France. And speaking of France, and Synactive is a French group, France has gone beyond the TikTok ban hysteria, which I'm not a huge fan of, and just done what probably makes the most sense in this case. They banned all recreational apps from phones that are issued to French government employees. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. Last Friday, a statement was issued by the Minister of Transformation and Public Services that said that no recreational apps have sufficiently robust security for them to be deployed on any government-owned devices. Okay, I agree with that. They did say that some exceptions would be allowed for apps that are needed for official communication and, of course, Macron's Candy Crush fixation. And I made that last part up. They did not announce a date for this to be imposed, so it's not clear exactly when this will go into effect in France. Well, he was already famous for his country music hits, I Got a Dog and a Truck and I Don't Give a Damn, Daddy's Old Cap, and the classic Mama, Why'd You Have to Run Off with Old Bill? But he gave it all up for the classical ballet at the age of 27 and became the lead danseur, debuting as James Rubin in La Sylphide and at the Ballet de la Riversboro, Wyoming. He is none other than Jason Wood.
I have no idea where you find all of these little pieces and put them together. This amazes me every week.
It's a mess in here, as Kurt Vonnegut said.
Oh, so yeah, like Doug said, I also took a look at this executive order and by President Biden, and honestly, the Register was the one that caught my attention because they just have the best headlines and the snarkiest news coverage out there. Basically, President Biden issued this executive order on commercial spyware, and the Register responded with this headline: U.S. President Biden kind of mostly bans commercial software. And I just kind of laughed at this wishy-washy, yeah, it's banned, but no, well, kind of, sort of, maybe. Anyhow, I mean, it's just, when you get into it and you read through the summary of this executive order, you're like, yep, this is pretty waffly, like a lot of orders, laws, and regulations where they go through and they carve out exceptions all over the place. My first reaction was that, hey, from the headline was, hey, they're somehow banning all of this commercial spyware in general, by anyone in the U.S. and for using it in the U.S. And then you dig into it in the first sentence, disabused me of that right away, and said that basically this is a policy inside the U.S. government saying United States government cannot use commercial spyware. And then they added a lot of caveats to that as to what is the type of commercial spyware that they're going after. Now, I don't have any particular problem with this executive order. I mean, essentially what you've got is, one, these apps are kind of scummy anyway. How you see them get used, there's cheap stuff out there that businesses use to spy on employees, which I always looked at and thought, if you're that worried about them, maybe you shouldn't give them access to your financials and all that other stuff if you've got to log every keystroke and whatnot that somebody did. But there's much more about the idea of, some of the stuff like NSO Group, Doug mentioned, Pegasus software, where, we see it being used to target journalists and whatnot. The next, also, I mean, the president's just basically, as the executive of the organization this ginormous organization that he heads up, is basically saying, hey, we're going to put a control in here and say that no, we're not going to be able to use any of this type of software. So this really only applies to, the federal government's use of this type of software. If you're in the United States, your state could still use it because they're not covered by this. The White House has a fact sheet that they use to go over this, and I thought this part was interesting, where they define the software, and this is a quote, as surveillance tools sold to access electronic devices remotely, extract their content, manipulate their components, all without the knowledge or consent of the device's users, end quote. And, honestly, I thought of penetration testing software that does this sort of stuff, got Interpreter rolling and kind of what it does, but obviously totally different purpose and what it's written for than spyware applications. But you still have that remote access capability and the ability to extract information from it, theoretically, without the end user knowing anything's going on. According to the Register, the kind of the prompt behind this was concern around these software applications being produced by organizations such as the NSO Group in Israel, to basically, they're said that no, if you go to the company's website, we only sell this for lawful investigations, to law enforcement, to nice guys, to whatever. But there's been plenty of, coverage here on this show, as well as other news articles about these softwares being used to target activists and journalists, politicians, academics, business leaders, basically anybody that kind of pisses off somebody in a government somewhere. And they're being used by authoritarian governments, as well as, according to the order, some democratic governments that are using it to target their own people. So there's concerns about this and how this is being used. President Biden is basically stating that he's requiring the U.S. not to use these tools, at least produced by a commercial entity, and those that they have all kinds of qualifications in here around this. Like it can't be. The spyware that's covered, can't be under control either directly or by some kind of strong influence by foreign actors or governments or things like that. They certainly don't make any mention of the idea that this is could be done by software. It could be written by the U.S. government to deploy. That it doesn't cover that. And again, like I said, there's all kinds of qualifications as to who wrote this and who has access to it and stuff like that. That to basically say we don't want spyware applications that another country could get access to. And there are exceptions even to the commercial side of it. So you can imagine the U.S. government going to, let's say, a defense contractor and say, hey, we need you to write an application that does X, Y, and Z. And that's fine because we kept it in control inside of the United States here. And then we can go ahead and use that for surveillance and espionage. So there's some splitting of hairs going along with this, as usual with a lot of, executive orders and legislation and things like that. One of the reasons that possibly that they decided to make this announcement as well, actually, is there's a summit for democracy. It's the second summit for democracy, which is being held at the end of March this month. So like next couple of days. And they're talking about this being part of a cornerstone initiative from the United States that's going to be brought up or presented at this summit. So, we got this diplomatic component as well. Honestly, I'm with Doug on executive orders in general because, the president goes out and issues this thing, and it's basically a way of getting around Congress. I want to make something happen. I can't get Congress to do what I want for whatever the reasons are. So I'm going to put this executive order in place and then require the United States government to do something or enforce something or what, ban or do, take some action that I really want to see done as president of the United States. And these things, like Doug said, there's no sunsetting of this. There's no reevaluation of it until the next president comes in. They only last as long as the current executive decides that they last. President Biden could, as soon as the summit is over, say, yeah, just, we're done with that. So now I'm going to rescind this and we're going to go back to using NSO groups stuff. So it's, yeah, I'm not a real big fan of executive orders. They're just you always hear stuff in the news where when a new president comes in and then there's a kerfluffle about changing all of these policies by the previous president and things that are in place that had the force of law, but now don't because the current president has decided, screw that. Either way, I look at this as just kind of it sounds interesting, and the headline from the Register really made me laugh and got my attention. But really what they're saying is we're not going to use spyware written by people we don't trust. We'll only use it by people that we do trust, that we have control over, that's within our jurisdiction. Or written by the U.S. government in particular, and it doesn't talk about who would be targeted by this stuff or anything like that. They just talk about the statements are made about things like we've been concerned about the use of this software by these commercial entities that are targeting, even in democratic governments, that are targeting people inside of their own government or their own citizens, and so we're going to set an example. I know Doug's article includes a quote from a member of Congress that says, this makes a great statement, which whenever I see that means, to me, is just kind of a flag saying, yeah, we're just waving this around and we don't expect it to really change much of anything. So that's just kind of my take on this. So how long is this ban going to stay in effect? Well, probably until President Biden or the next president or somebody 3 presidents down decides, change my mind. And we're going to reverse course. So we'll see what happens, but it is kind of interesting to see kind of the focus and the heat being put on this particular area of software. So go read it, check it out if you like. We got a number of links in the show notes for you to view at your own leisure.
Thank you, Jason. There's a famous episode of The West Wing where they want to assassinate this foreign leader, and there was a standing executive order that they couldn't assassinate foreign leaders, and so the president does some kind of legal maneuver to suspend that executive order while they assassinate the guy, then puts it back in place. There's so many ways this can be manipulated for bad things.
That's all it would take. Draft me a new executive order. Okay.
Literally. I did some reading about this because I was interested in that article, and I was interested in executive orders because we all have presidents we don't like, and when there's one we don't like, we tend to be more critical of them than the ones we do like. But all presidents write these things. So before you start bashing Biden for writing executive orders, I didn't mean Jason, but I mean anyone. Before somebody's bashing President Biden or bashing President Trump or bashing President Bush or any other, or President William Henry Harrison, although he didn't write any, but you have to think about, that everybody does these things, and some of them are just governmental maneuvers, but they can certainly be used for bad things too. And I wasn't a huge fan of this one, like you said. It's just sort of all over the place, and it sounds like it's full of holes, and there's a dozen ways to get around it. But yeah, not a fan. Anyway, and finally, have you ever seen water in a video game? I mean, you probably have, or in something. I mean, it didn't have to be a video game even. But, that's hard to code, right? I mean, if you've ever written any kind of game code or whatever, this is the stuff you cut the corners on, because it's not that necessary typically, unless you wanted to make a swimming simulator or something, which sounds like the most horrible video game that was ever built. But, I mean, even if you're making like a surfing game or a water skiing game or anything, water is tough. I mean, typically in the game, water is blue and flat. Like I used to do a lot of stuff with flight simulators and stuff like that, and you're flying over the ocean. The ocean's just this sort of blue, gray, flat space down there. It's like a 2D polygon representation of water, right? I mean, coding this up in some kind of elaborate water background was really a secondary goal in any game I could imagine. And if you actually did it, it would take a lot of processing power to model water as a fluid dynamics, because if you've ever looked at fluid dynamics code or fluid dynamics math, that's a big deal. But the modern age is on us, and you can do a lot more to add realism to games these days than you used to. I mean, and if you've ever seen the sea itself, or you've gone sailing on Lake Michigan on the wrong day with me, sorry, George, but you know that water is the most chaos-ridden, constantly moving set of sprites you could ever possibly imagine. And the fluid dynamics of it's even worse. Well, this article, I just put this article in because I know a lot of you are coders and things. The article was commenting about the latest this game, and I haven't seen this game or anything else, but it's called Horizon Forbidden West, and it was from AAA Studios. And they're no longer just making water a flat polygon, but they put a whole lot of detail into the sea for this post-apocalyptic video game. And, on those old flight sims, water, clouds, all that stuff was really bland, because modeling a cloud or fog or water or even rain was really, really hard. And it sucks a GPU down like bourbon goes on Paul's Security Weekly. So water and clouds are hard. Fog, moving plant vegetation. I mean, think of the last time you went outside, if you ever go outside. I try not to, but if you do, and you saw those leaves just moving in the breeze, I mean, just trying to model that. But that's what adds that realism, right? I mean, that would make like that visual image like, wow, this looks actually real. And I remembered walking through the jungle in Indonesia, and I was thinking about all the little things that were moving and the drops of water falling off the plants and millipedes running through wow, that's a lot of coding. So, I mean, I really was thinking, it really piqued my, thoughts about this in games and whatnot. And, you just want to program a beach into a game. There goes the GPU. You're going to use everything up. I mean, and this game is still not doing fluid dynamics, so don't get me wrong. But they did apparently do a really good job of modeling the Pacific Ocean, which is a big setting for this game. So I thought you might like to look at how some of that stuff is getting rendered if you're interested in such thing. That's the news. Thank you, Jason, and I will see you on Friday with the Security Weekly News.